Hi everyone, welcome. I'm preparing to check in on my bin of red wigglers here, a 172-day-old system, which, everything's relative, I guess. Once upon a time, a couple years ago, I probably would have considered a system 172 days of age as being well past its prime, probably should have been harvested for its casting and given the worms a fresh new place to live. More recently, though, I've been going much, much longer than my old tendencies, which were maybe treating 150 days as a system's life cycle. At this point, even a system that well exceeds 150, I'm treating as more of like a mid-life system at this point. So this is the place where we're doing the non-frozen feedings, and not all of them were non-frozen. We fed the system 14 times so far. Only the last 11 were not frozen. The last time we were in here, I didn't have this second sheet of paper on here. We covered up with this single sheet of newspaper, and I figured let's just see what one additional thin sheet of paper might do. And it does seem like the paper's a little bit wavy. I see a little bit of staining from moisture. I'm not sure, maybe, I don't know, maybe those are just old stains, because we've even got this additional level of protection here with the feeding zone indicator. So right through here we had 3 sheets of relatively thin paper, but I still feel dryness, so I was just curious, how much protection does a single sheet of paper offer, and I figured we would do a little bit of a test with that additional sheet on there. But it was a little test that sort of occurred to me after the system had already been checked in on last time and the video was done, and then I just sort of figured, hey, I wonder what might happen. Every system I've got that's younger than this one has plastic top coverings. Here we're already over to paper top coverings. To me, it seems like once a system starts to develop to the point where there's a pretty high concentration of worm castings, the stuff can definitely hang on to its moisture without help and isn't as prone to drying out due to evaporation. Perhaps just the top layer will dry off considerably to evaporation, but that top layer of casting material just has this really good protective quality where it hangs on to moisture. So I just aired up or tilled up, whatever you want, aerated that outer edge over there. I'm not sure. Usually I'll kind of dive down into the feeding area where our feeding zone indicator was to see how things are going there. Today I just felt like kind of mixing it up a little bit and perhaps agitating and aerating the outer edges first and saving the feeding for last. I mean, despite the fact that we typically feed down the middle in almost all my systems, and that includes this system too, you would think the worms would consider the middle of the bin as the prime place to be, where all the feedings are going in all the time. But you could see the outer edges are quite popular, not just for worms, but for springtails too. I see worms and springtails pretty much everywhere. I bumped into a couple leftover items here and there, but it does seem like we've managed to do a pretty good job keeping the food items collected up and centered. I mean, earlier you might have saw me bury a couple things over on this side. It did seem to me like perhaps, larger objects are much better off in a bin like this to be below the surface where there's still enough moisture to permit ongoing decomposition. This is the stem of a pumpkin, and that just reminds me now that this system somewhere in it has a cork. This is the system that inherited the cork through many generations now. The cork's been in service for years. One of these days I should really do a true check on where. I mean, I did it not too long ago. I was curious, so I did a little research, looked through older videos, tried to see if I could find the point in time where the cork was placed into this system. Well, not this system, but into a system. But I would have to treat this as like the worms that are descendants of those worms that occupied the bin, which was actually outside where the cork was first started, and then these worms were eventually brought indoors. I think it might have even been one of my very first outdoor worm bin setups. So, all right, I think time has come to make our way down into the feeding area, see how things are progressing. I mean, I'm a definite advocate of keeping things frozen until it comes time to feed them to the worms. I mean, for some obvious reasons, instead of having this stuff spoiling and making a stink somewhere, perhaps in your kitchen or something. It does seem like freezing it prevents that from happening. Simple preventative measure. So I just figured here in this system we would step away from my preferred way of presenting the foods to the worms, which is frozen. And here for a while now, none of the stuff that the system's been getting has been frozen. All right. Can't believe how much of this cucumber remains. They were given about a half of a cucumber. Looks like they've already chewed up a good bit of it, but this end of it is still holding up. Perhaps because of the thin skin just hasn't been infiltrated. Well, they're definitely making their way through this thing. Well, before we breeze by it completely, there's this thing here, very obvious, large object that I made no mention of other than maybe acknowledging that I had found something, and I simply set it aside. This is the stem of Brussels sprout. And other large chunks that we encountered earlier on, I think may have been part of the other one. There was another piece like this which went to pieces almost right away, and that one still seemed to hold together. Here's like a chunk of gourd. Every now and then we just take a little chip off of it just to help it along. And it's probably soft enough that I could crush it if I wanted to, but I figured leave it be. So this system definitely seems to be the system of leftovers, because if some of the things that I see in here had been frozen before being put in the worm bin, I think they'd be gone by now, such as the cucumber. It seems unusual to see that much cucumber left over. This is a tomato. This tomato goes back 2 feedings. And the last feeding was 11 days ago. I think it was 12 days prior when the tomato went in. So a few weeks there. And we've also encountered a few chunks of paper and cardboard. So there's all kinds of leftovers in here, It almost makes you wonder, do we even need to feed? A lot of people would say, don't feed until you see all the previous food being gone, So, I don't know. To me, it seems like what I'm putting in today, especially stuff that's not frozen, needs some time for, bacteria to get into it and let the natural decomposition process kick in. And that seems to depend on almost every type of food. It does so at a different pace. And then freezing it or not freezing it also seems to put a big kink into that. Certain things go right away if they've been frozen. Other things, or those same things, if not frozen, just stick around forever and ever. But that's why I think putting in food today is something that will turn into something that the worms can definitely make use of, perhaps in a week, perhaps in a couple weeks, who knows, depends. So I don't mind combining newly added stuff with what exists already as leftovers. Before we put the coffee and the food in, let's recycle this. Top off that nice layer of bedding we just gave them with an X feeding zone indicator. At this point, it's becoming supplementary bedding down here in the worm bin. And we even got a little bit of citrus to spice up their feeding. Ooh, what a nice, pleasant, fresh smell. Sometimes you come back into a bin that's been fed citrus, and that scent of the citrus still seems to linger. So now, let's save the coffee for the end. We'll just dump it on top of all the old and new foods combined. Get everything back down where we know all the fun's going to be. And ooh, I like stuck my finger down into the middle of this thing by accident, and it's like it fell into this little hollow that the worms had created in here. So this thing does seem to be even jammed full of worms, more so than I thought it was originally. Alright, cool. Alright, good enough. So I've got grit, so let's give them some grit to complement their feeding. This is pulverized eggshell, so definitely stay away from the dust of this stuff if you're feeding it to your worms. Definitely don't want to be inhaling that dust. And within our nice new replacement feeding zone indicator is a nice big batch of coffee. I'm running low on worm chow. Normally the worm chow would go in here as a complement to the foods that they're getting, like especially the coffee. But since I'm running so low, I'm going to hang on to what I've got. Perhaps I should have just depleted it here, and then I would have had my motivation to create more. I guess by hanging on to the little tiny bit that I've got, I'm sort of able to push off making more until such a time that I feel like I might want to get my butt in gear. Alright, well, that's it for our check-in with the red wigglers. Doing really good. I didn't see the cork, and I was pretty thorough. I was kind of hoping we'd bump into the cork, because I don't think it's been more than probably been a few check-ins now since the last time that thing surfaced. Every now and then it shows up. Sometimes it's missing in action for weeks and weeks. So it's this stuff here. I guess it makes sense to try to return stuff to the bin, but you know, I'm also reminded of the video from last time where I even commented on how the stuff in this system was so sticky that it would just keep sticking to my glove, and the stuff that really wants to stick to your glove is usually a pretty good indicator that the system might be a little bit overly damp, but I'm not seeing that today. My gloves seemed to flake off pretty easily, so cleanup should be pretty simple. Alright everyone, that's it for our check-in. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.